Thank you, Cecilia, for the kind introduction.
Yes.
And thanks to all of you for being here. And it's really a great honor to be able to speak to all of you and to get a chance to speak with Jan about subjects that he is one of the world experts on. And maybe as a first topic, we have realized that in many ways we don't share a vocabulary in talking about the world, in talking about the cosmos. And even the term cosmology is a point of some disagreement. So I wonder if you could just recall for us what came to mind. What did you think of when we asked, is the Anthropocene a cosmology?
Yeah, it was fascinating because we knew we had to speak with each other, and then John emailed me and said, wouldn't it be great, to think of the Anthropocene, in terms of cosmology? And I thought a bit, I said, yeah, that's fine, absolutely, that would work really well. And then we corresponded some more, and it became clear I had completely the wrong end of the stick. And being a typical barbarian scientist, and not knowing much of this wider culture, John was referring to quite a different form of cosmology to the one that I had in my head. So I guess the one I had in my head was the scientific view of the cosmos, the universe. And the Anthropocene fits into that in a number of ways, but the way that popped into my head as a geologist, as an old-fashioned, straightforward, mud on my knees geologist, is that we spend a lot of our time trying to work out Earth history and match it up from one part of the world to another. So it's not history in one place, but it's a history of the world, and what we do is we correlate between rock sections in Germany and Great Britain and China and South America. And we look for material evidence in the strata for history. And one of the things we have done as humans in the Anthropocene is to take that material evidence out to other planets. So now on the moon there is remains of a number of spaceships, a golf club and a golf ball or two left out there. We now have bits of working and non-working spaceships on Mars. We have one that has landed on Titan. We have a couple that have landed on Venus very briefly in there. So we have put out, if you like, a time plane for the first time in 4.5 billion years of the history of the solar system, of if you like, an Anthropocene, part of an Anthropocene layer, a net, if you like, a timeline drawn between. So that's what came into my head, and then it became clear that John had a quite different, if you like, world view of how it, and indeed meaning of the word cosmology.
Yeah, it's true.
So,
and that view I do also understand, right? That is the standard Western scientific cosmology, which is a subfield of astrophysics, which is about the extent of the universe, its origins, when it ends, as Cecilia reminded us. And it is something that is studied out there, right? That we observe with concepts and tools, methods of objective science. As an historian of science, that is something I'm very interested in seeing the origins of. How does that conception, the concepts we now have of the universe, come into existence? When, through what actions, on the basis of what evidence, does this naturalist conception of the universe come into existence? But as somebody with earlier training in cultural anthropology, another conception of cosmology is there, which is, yes, the theory of what exists in the universe, but also questions about where humans stand in relation to what's in the universe. The order of things, but in physical terms, as well as in moral, aesthetic, religious terms that come from the side of meaning and from intention. So cosmology for anthropologists is not exactly, but it's close to culture. It's a way of seeing the world. What counts as significant in the world? What are the choices that are good and what are bad choices? What is the order of the heavens, just as in scientific cosmology, but also what's the order of the plants? What's the order of the animals? What's the order of human society? So sociological elements fit into anthropological cosmology as well. It's a way of seeing the world, it's a way of theorizing the world, but as anthropologists show through their work in doing ethnography, in participant observation, those concepts are not just written down in texts, they're not just communicated in symbols, they're also lived. They're part of everyday practice. They're part of what Bourdieu calls a habitus, right? It's a scheme of interpretation that's tied into what people do every day with each other, in interaction with others, and with concrete things. So the social, the moral, the aesthetic, the religious, as well as the natural, all are woven together in a cosmology. So to ask the question, is the Anthropocene a cosmology? And to answer it the way Jan at first did, that makes perfect sense within the standard framework of the sciences. But to ask it anthropologically, to ask it in terms of, well, what is our system of belief, not just about the physical world, but the system that includes the notion that there's a division between the physical world and the world of meaning. What changes in our cosmology when we start to think of the Anthropocene? That is, a natural world which is affected by, transformed by human intentions and motivations. And I guess I can say something about that. I've thought a little bit about what that might be, and I'm sure we're going to hear, and we have heard a lot about that already today, and we will in the next couple days. But one of the systems of thought that I referred to that makes sense when thinking about cosmology is a fairly recent book by an anthropologist named Philippe Descola, Beyond Nature and Culture, which claims that there are basically 4 types of cosmology across the entire cultural record, in all the societies of the world. And one of them is the naturalist cosmology. That's the one we live in, and for Descola, Descartes, as a good French rationalist, epitomizes it. Descartes' view of the world that there's thinking substance and extended substance, and those are 2 separate things. That's basically the common sense naturalist viewpoint of people in the West. But in addition, there is, according to Descola, animism, which imagines that, or which inhabits a world, right? This is an ontological view. This is a view of what is in the world. According to animism, there may be differences between physical objects, between, say, myself and a bird or a plant, but inside we all have a possibility of intentionality, of life. And there was a conference here last year on animism, and it seems to be an idea which is taking on a lot of steam. It seems to have a lot of life. Totemism is another possibility, that certain animals are seen as having the same internal and external qualities as certain members of certain tribes. And in Australia, that's the cosmology that holds sway there. And finally, according to Descola, there's a 4th general type of cosmology, which is that of analogism, which is a world which is imagined as full of multiple differences at every level, but where it's possible to find large analogies between different domains of existence. Okay, so the Renaissance in the West is analogist, and he also believes that Chinese cosmology is analogist. So how does that help us in thinking about the Anthropocene? Have we left the naturalist framework is the main question. And I think some of the conversations I've already heard today and that I've heard elsewhere are suggesting that yes, we have. We've moved into something like an animist framework. We've begun to imagine that the world, the natural world, the non-human world, has capacities and thoughts, intentions, or at least an ability to act in unpredictable ways that make it somewhat similar to a human. Right? We grant it moral capacities just as we grant ourselves moral capacities. But we can think a little more about that down the line.
Yeah. Or perhaps we can even think in the other way around, in that humans may have rather more of the qualities of the natural world than sometimes we flatter ourselves that we do not have. You know, for instance, we are primates. We share, I think, 97% of our genome with the chimpanzee. You know, we are clearly very closely related, you know, to organisms that we would push outside of ourselves into what we would call nature. And in terms of being, what we do and what we're driven by, there have been people, Desmond Morris originally, for instance, who would say that we're often driven rather more by our, innate drives of various sorts, rather than by a sense of, philosophy or rationality. And of course, part of that, and part of what we would like, rather than what we think is best, ultimately, it could well be a factor pushing the Anthropocene in the kind of direction it's going into, and at the speed it's going into as well.
And I think we want to keep that in mind as one of the possibilities in the conversations that are going to be happening here, that even as we heard at dinner last night, there's a way, the Anthropocene invites us to think of humanity as being a natural thing like any other thing, right? That it follows the same kind of causality as natural objects. We are, in making claims like that, generally applying the naturalistic conception of the world as predictable, as you say, not driven by intentionality, as having intrinsic natural laws that are outside of mentation, outside of thought, outside of interpretation. And while certainly we want to incorporate the thinking of a range of natural sciences, at the same time, I think there's a real concern that we not simply bring in the sciences to replace the interpretive arts, the Geisteswissenschaften or the humanities. That in addition, we need to humanize the sciences, not merely naturalize the humanities. And hopefully this is a place where that can occur to an extent. One of the ways in which sociologists of science, historians of science do that is to show the facts about the natural world as part of culture, as part of science, is to ask about what kinds of activities, what kinds of social organizations and institutions house the facts of the world. Through what kinds of interactions, through what kinds of social organizations does an image of the world in naturalistic terms get imposed? And here, we're talking with someone who is involved in this directly in the case of the Anthropocene. You work for the Stratigraphy Commission. You're a member of it. And you don't work for it, but you're a member of it. And that means one of the things that you are trying to do is persuade people that the Anthropocene is indeed an epoch, which should be added to the geological record. Is that true? Or?
Well, it's perhaps not quite. Persuade is not the word. What our job, again, this is part of the scientific world, and particularly, I think, with the Anthropocene, which is, one can technically describe as a hot potato in geology at the moment. We have to try and be as, in one sense, as dispassionate as we can about it. It is a new concept, the Anthropocene, the idea that humans are changing the world. And for geologists, the important part is not the human part. The important thing, as we try and describe Earth history, what we try and do is we try and describe the history of the Earth going back 4.5 billion years and fit ourselves into it, is not that humans are here and changing things. The important thing is that the world is being changed substantially to a degree that the record of that change that is preserved in the sands and muds now forming in lakes and rivers and in the sea and in soils, if that were to be fossilized and carried forward 10 million years, 100 million years, that will look so different from previous strata that any visiting alien, say, coming in and trying to become an earthling geologist would say, something happened here, the world's history changed here, and the world went from one state to another, and we would have a geological boundary. I think that is the logic of the Anthropocene. And of course, what we have to do is we are not far in the future, we are now. So what we have to do is think in almost two levels. The far in the future, how does this fit in? The far in the past, how does what is happening now compare with events going back 50, 100 million years ago? And also, in the now, what changes are being made to the world, to the biology, to the chemistry, to the physics of the world? And of course, something that is not really part of our professional concern, but it's something that we are nevertheless concerned about because of the human aspect, is what will the Anthropocene do to us as it evolves. So there are a number of levels, but I guess the primary level that I work on, and I'm part of a group called the Anthropocene Working Group, and it is looking to see whether the Anthropocene can be formalized. It can become an Anthropocene period or an Anthropocene epoch, and it can go into the geological timescale formally together with the Jurassic, the Cretaceous, and all those other epochs. And to do that, we have to play it straight down the line, and we have to look at the pros and the cons simultaneously, the evidence for, the evidence against.
Well, my guess is that many of the people who are here are already persuaded that this is a good concept to think with, or at least it's an intriguing one to think with. What is the state of play among the people you need to convince? Are you feeling like people, how do you have to convince them? Who do you have to convince? What kinds of arguments will be the right kinds of ones to make this cosmological definition stick?
To give it the stamp of authority and approval and formality. Well, really what we have to do is we have to demonstrate that the products of the Anthropocene are sufficiently distinct from those of earlier times in geology, that is from earlier strata, to be recognized and classified as Anthropocene by working scientists, particularly earth scientists, but also others, oceanographers, ecologists, and so on. But the geologists, again, we're talking, the Anthropocene turns everything upside down, unfortunately, everything, in terms of our procedures. Firstly, with every other period in the past, the Precambrian, the Cambrian, the Carboniferous, the Cretaceous, and so on, one has always started with the evidence, with the rock strata. People have gone to look for those for pleasure and profit, and worked out a history, slowly, painstakingly, over decades and indeed centuries, from those, and eventually worked out the history, a sequence of events in Earth history covering hundreds, thousands of millions of years, in which at sometimes the world changed significantly, distinctly, permanently. And those are the, if you like, the main marker layers we choose as a boundaries. It is easy to tell Cretaceous strata below from tertiary strata above because the world changed. The dinosaurs disappeared, lots of other creatures disappeared, the mammals came in, lots of other creatures came in, so the strata are easier to tell apart. That is the evidence. And indeed, there is we have two forms of time. We have the normal time that everybody deals with, and we have something called time rock. It's a parallel system, which is the time of the evidence. There is a Jurassic period, when the dinosaurs lived and so on, and the Jurassic system, which is all of the strata which were formed during the Jurassic. So for the Anthropocene, we as geologists have to think not just of Anthropocene history, everything that is going on, but the Anthropocene material record, which includes the soil outside beneath the grass. It includes the sediments in the river that flow through Berlin. It includes the sediments on the seafloor, on the beaches. And again, we have to turn our heads inside out. It includes, we look at fossils. I'm a paleontologist, so I look at bones. I look also at tracks and trails and footprints. Well, the Haus der Kulturen der Welt is a wonderful trace fossil. It is made of eminently geological materials. It can be preserved in the right circumstances, and we have made it, and it is a piece of geology. So again, this is part of the material record that we look at. And because it's new, we're not used to looking at that. So we are having to, if you like, alter our own internal cosmology, in this. And I presume, again, John has looked a lot at the way people have altered their cosmologies and their worldviews, particularly in the last couple of centuries, in what one might call early Anthropocene times.
So earlier you mentioned that when you're making the case, you don't want to put the emphasis on the human aspect. You want to put the emphasis on the evidence.
On the evidence, on the change.
Evidence.
Yeah.
So does that mean you, in arguing about it, remove your sense of the causes? Or is it simply that you
No.
try to remove the kind of red siren saying this is a crisis that we've caused? Are you trying to remove any moralizing judgment? Or are you also removing, you just want to talk about things you can observe and not making guesses about what caused them?
Yeah, at that level, we certainly have to remove the moralizing, because as soon as, let's say, my colleagues on the various Stratigraphy Commission begin to think that I might be trying to be a pressure group, part of a pressure group, begin to push people, begin, worse still, to moralize, then they will immediately give the Anthropocene big thumbs down. This thing has got to be, to work geologically and formally, it has got to be simply evidence-based. Humans are very important because, of course, they're driving this. But the effect, it is the effects. It is a fact that, for instance, as we've seen today, animals and plants, the fossils of the future, have been moved all around the world. And that effect, will leave an imprint in the strata, as those creatures fossilize. It is because we have moved mud and sand and gravel and rock all around the world to create the new strata, including the part of it which is the house de Kultur in dat Welt in here. So it is the production of these things. There are also very non-human parts of that. We have started something which is going to go on. So let's say we have put carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. That has begun to cause a warming. As the warming proceeds over the next decades and centuries, that is going to start, more likely than not, to release large amounts of methane from the permafrost in Siberia, in Alaska, in Greenland, and so on. And that will then go into the atmosphere and cause a warming of its own. That will break down in 10 years into carbon dioxide, which will cause further warming. And that will be a purely physico-chemical effect, often repeated in the Earth's past. And we, by that stage, are one step removed. As being, we are, if you like, we lit the blue touch paper to the rocket, and the rocket has taken off and is working purely on physical and chemical and non-human biological principles. And it is still the Anthropocene, even though we have, by a long time ago, maybe lost control over that particular aspect.
So sociologists often are very interested in very boring details. So forgive me, but I really want to know, who do you have to convince?
Okay.
Is it just 20 people on this commission, and does it go then to a higher power? And who appoints those people?
Right.
And who do they have to convince once
Right.
they've agreed on the stamp? Are they somehow the rulers of the epochs? Are they the ones who determine for all time what the eras will be? Do you have, formally, is there another route? Are there further steps that need to be taken? Informally,
well,
is your Anthropocene group thinking about how to get this message out if this designation is given?
Okay, if our audience has the patience, I will now go through some bureaucracy for you, the bureaucracy of time. The sets of Time Lords in increasing rank, as it were, in a hierarchy. First, right at the very bottom, there is me and my colleagues. On the Anthropocene Working Group, and we are a group set up since 2009, since the Stratigraphy Commission of London finished some work, wrote a paper suggesting there was some sense, some geological sense in the Anthropocene. And then we were asked to form a working group, which we have. There are about 25, 28 of us, a few here at the meeting here, including, let's say, Will Steffen, who gave the keynote talk, Earl Ellis and so on, and there are about 25 of us. About half geologists and half other people, because we have, and that, again, that's a difference from the standard working group in geology. So we will work together for a few years to gather the evidence for and against the Anthropocene. Is it justifiable geologically? If so, when did it begin? That hasn't been fixed. Did it begin millennia ago, centuries ago, or did it begin, and the evidence is now really quite good, that a recognizable stratigraphic beginning is around about 1950, as Will Steffen said.
So not 1780.
Not 1780. That is when, if you like, the history began. That is when CO2 began to go up. But in terms of the evidence we see on the ground, in the sediments, a lot of the evidence, and the evidence, if I can just again say, is things like the radionuclides, post-1945 and especially post-1950, with the above-ground A-bomb tests. We are all contaminated by those. All sand and mud around the world is contaminated by those, and we can measure that. There is nitrogen. We have changed the chemistry of nitrogen. We have changed the isotopic composition of reactive nitrates on the ground because we've pulled so much out of the air using the Haber-Bosch process. And you can measure that in lakes far from people, in Spitsbergen, in Canada, and so on. A lot of the evidence, metals, aluminium, is almost unknown geologically, native, pure aluminium. We have created, since about 1950, about 500 million tons of the stuff. Enough, if you were to take, put it into standard kitchen foil, you could wrap the whole of the USA in aluminium kitchen foil, and a little bit more, a bit of Canada as well. I'm not suggesting we try and do that, but that is, if you like, and there's lots and lots of bits of that around, and cigarette paper and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of the mass migrations of animals and plants. So 1950 is looking pretty good, but it is early days. We might change our minds still. We're geologists, we often do. So we will try and come to say how, if the Anthropocene is for real, geologically, it should be defined at such and such a level, by such and such a means, either by a reference level somewhere in some lake sediments, what's called a golden spike, or global boundary stratigraphic section and point.
Which is literally a golden spike.
It's literally a golden spike. It's a place.
Object with a golden head.
Well, it's
not that little.
It's usually a rusty iron spike, you know, to tell the truth. But yes, it is a level in strata to which everybody is a reference level for everybody. And it's usually been very well studied to have lots of biological, physical, chemical evidence below and above, and lots of other things have been studied to say that that reference level will work all around the world. You know, or we can simply choose a time. We can say it began, 1945, when the first A-bomb exploded in Alamogordo. And so what we then do is we put all the evidence together, probably in large volumes which would break your toe if it fell onto it, because there is a lot of evidence, you know, out there, and a lot we still have to make. And then we pass that up to our parent body, which is the next feeding level, as it were, of the Time Lords, which is the Sub-Commission on Quaternary Stratigraphy, the SQS. The whole sub-commission is well, it represents thousands, literally thousands, of people who work on the Quaternary period, the Ice Ages. And it has a secretariat. They are the people who will mainly look at it and say, we like that, we don't like that. If they don't like it, it simply stays. If they like it, they pass it up to the International Commission on Stratigraphy, which is made up of the chairs and the vice chairs of the subcommissions of all of the Cambrian, Ordovician, Silurian, Devonian, and so on and so on and so on, about 20 periods, about 20 sets of people, say maybe 40 odd people in total, and they will then decide. They will take a vote on it. In fact, they will argue a little bit, maybe a lot, and take a vote. If they then say yes, after this, after all of that, then the decision still has to be ratified by the International Union of Geological Sciences, and they can also say no. When the beginning of the Quaternary period was readjusted a few years ago, after long and bitter, I have to say, dispute, vehement dispute, the IUGS first of all threw it out, and it had to be reworded, re-rationalized, and then sent back again, and then they eventually took it. It's a long, very bureaucratic process. Geologists are incredibly reluctant to change the timescale because it is the backbone of all of geology. We deal in time more than anything else. We have 4.5 billion years. We have to cope with all of this time somehow, and so we try and have, if you like, a stable timescale. And geologists are very reluctant to change that stability, either by changing something, by adding a new hooligan epoch, like the Anthropocene in here, where the rules are changing, which is still happening, which is only beginning, and is 5 orders of magnitude shorter than the average epoch. in the time column. So we will have our work cut out to do this. The science will be wonderful. One of the great things about doing all this formal stuff is that you have to understand the phenomenon that you are trying to classify. Yeah. So what we really will have to do is take the Anthropocene to small pieces. The biology, the chemistry, the physics, everything, the anthropology, the archaeology, the cultural history, and so on, and really try and understand it between us and pass that understanding on as best as we can. And then only then can we say, okay, well, this then will be the best decision to make.
So is there a risk that in communicating this concept before that you've gone through this very onerous process, that you might be setting some forces unexpectedly against you in that, as you said, if it seems like you're an interest group, you're going to meet resistance right away.
Straight away.
Is there any danger that as the term takes off and really gets a life of its own, as is happening, that you may lose control of the term? Is there some worry about that?
I don't think we can lose control. We don't have control. What we have at the moment, I say we are the lowest level. The geologists can simply turn around and say, no, we don't like this. Right. Even if we've worked for 10 years, produced 50 volumes, that would break all of your toes if it fell on them. They have the power to do that. We do not. We can propose. They will dispose.
Right.
So
does smoke come out of the window?
Something. Well, it's.
Well, is there a policy of? I'm sure there are press releases made.
Yeah.
Is there thinking within your group, the Anthropocene group, but also within the Stratigraphy Commission? Is there thinking about what comes next? I mean, this is a very focused project targeted at a very small number of people who are the experts in the field.
Who are the experts in the field.
Is there then, because clearly, despite the fact that you need to remove all of the alarmist rhetoric from the scientific arguments you're making, the reason you're making the arguments is out of a sense of alarm for a lot of people. It's not just the fascination of this new wrinkle in the geological record. It's the anticipation of what comes next. So is there some thought, informally or even formally, about how to take this new definition, if it sticks, and communicate more broadly? Because just thinking back, Stefan's referenced Darwin, for instance, and this is a change perhaps even greater than Darwin's change, the change brought by Darwin in the understanding of the order of nature and the history of nature, right? The introduction of evolution and natural selection. That did not happen overnight, right? That took years of cultural preparation with theories that were similar to it, but different and unacceptable for various ways. Darwin himself held back for decades before publishing, before announcing what he'd done. And even then, the reception was very spotty. Many people weren't convinced. Various kinds of syncretic adaptations of Darwin were present for a very long time, and as Dr. Stevens pointed out, it still hasn't taken across the board. So what kinds of steps are you thinking about to make this cosmological transformation down the line? Well,
the first point you make is very important, that we have to, we cannot be a pressure group. We are a scientific body who are trying to look at this dispassionately. Now, of course, we are human, and we also develop ideas, and we consider that certain things are more likely than others. I consider, having been involved with this now for a few years, is that the evidence that the Anthropocene is a real and significant geological phenomenon is pretty good. But knowing that, what I have to do is I have to balance that. So what I've done as chair of this body is simply to invite, if you like, enemies of the Anthropocene, or people who are deeply skeptical of the idea, indeed, onto the working group, who are on the working group, and also to publish in volumes that we're publishing. So we have all of the evidence, pro and con, simply set out. So it is, disagreement in science is commonplace. We work with that. This is, in many ways, it's our bread and butter. It keeps us alive, it keeps us awake through all the masses of data. And so we have to make sure that we represent the group, because we're all too certain that we can be wrong. I've been wrong many times about things in the past. In the Anthropocene, I thought originally that 1800 was by far the best time to select. Now, I've changed my mind about that. 1800 does not work very well geologically. You know, things are too scattered in time and space for that. 1950 seems to work rather better, but we may change our mind on that, you know, in 2 years' time or 5 years' time.
What kind of objections might you anticipate destroying the whole project? I mean, what would be our evidence against the Anthropocene?
Well, one is simply the brevity of the whole thing. Remember, if we are talking 1950, we are talking, what now? The Anthropocene is 63 years old. You know, I've only just got, you know, I'm only just a little bit younger than that. And so the Holocene, for instance, is 11,500 years old, the Holocene epoch. Now, the Holocene is by far the shortest of the epochs. Most epochs in the Tertiary, let's say the average is about 13 million years. Eocene, Miocene, Pliocene, and so on. The average is about, some are 20, some are about 5, but that is the average. The Holocene it's a special case. It's one of, the last of about 100 major glacial interglacial changes in the Quaternary period. That is the last 2.5 million years. And we set it apart, partly because it has some human influence, and again, that is one of the arguments against. The Holocene already has human influence in it, so why should the Anthropocene be any different from that? And the other thing is that it's set apart because it creates distinct deposits we can tell apart from other rocks. So when the sea level came up 120 meters over about 5,000 years from the end of the Pleistocene epoch into the Holocene epoch, the world changed and geography started to build around it. All the big deltas built out, the river valleys formed, and all of that, all the soils formed. So they create if you like, the very substructure upon which we all live. So the Holocene, despite being very brief, has very good geological rationale. So what we have to do is make a similar rationale for the Anthropocene. And we have to say, even though it is 2 orders or 3 orders of magnitude shorter than even the Holocene, it works geologically. You know, so the brevity is one thing, the human influence, and just how much change there has been from, let's say, late Holocene into Anthropocene times, and is it really so sharp, or is it so gradual that you know, somebody working in the field can't tell the difference? Do things happen differently in time and space? So China has a different history from Germany, from Britain, you know, from Peru, and so on. We're trying to now measure very small intervals of time. When I measure rocks in the field, Silurian rocks, I'm looking at error bars of, if I get an error bar of less than 200,000 years, I think I'm doing really well. Here the error bars are decades. So these are all the things that can get thrown at us in no uncertain terms.
Sure. And I could also see if a lot of people are persuaded by some of the claims that are made are launched as possibilities in the brochure, such as completely upsetting our understanding of science, completely upsetting our understanding of nature. If those claims are attached to the Anthropocene in the future, that may also make people skeptical.
Yeah.
So in a way, the enthusiasm that may be generated by the term is something that in the scientific frame is something to be a bit worried about.
Is a rather frowned upon, indeed. Yes, and in fact there was a paper out in GSA today, last year, which came out saying, is the Anthropocene geology or is it pop science, was the title. And they were arguing, in fact, that it was pop science. Now, we did, as a group, we responded to that and said, well, there's all kinds of interesting and exciting and new things about the Anthropocene, and it has not been settled by any means, but it is a serious form of study. But certainly one of the things that will make the traditional stratigrapher, a member of what I think Brian Lovell, a former chair of the Geological Society, called a member of my tribe. What will make them nervous is the fact that the Anthropocene is important. It can be used for as a context to understand where we are, and also as a context to do things like make laws, even. You know,
that's what makes them nervous.
That's what makes them nervous, yeah. Because it is loading the dice of a decision, and so I think it will take some time. I'm not saying it's not a blanket thing, but I can see among members of the community, this kind of thing is very new, and it upsets the purity, if you like, of the stratigraphic, the geological historical decision making. To suddenly have something that it might matter to other groups and rather large groups of people, whether the Anthropocene is made formal or not.
So I think we need to keep that in mind, right? That there are these constraints which haven't changed in the last 100 years. I mean, the standards of objectivity may have shifted in some ways,
yeah.
but still the sense that this be a neutral decision made outside of any kind of political influence, outside of any kind of cultural shading, any kind of personal interpretation, outside of any kind of theological frame, is essential to the success of the term
yeah.
scientifically. And nevertheless, it seems for the impact of the concept to reach the scale that it needs to, we need to entertain those possibilities at the same time.
Yeah.
We need to invite the humanists, the poets, the religious thinkers,
yes.
to see if indeed a new nature, a new cosmology, a new understanding of the universe that forces some of those very definitions of science, its method, its understanding about the world and humans' relations to it, those shifts might have to happen.
Yeah.
In a safe setting, perhaps, where all we do is deal with culture,
yeah.
like
yeah.
the
yeah.
house of the cultures of the world.
Yeah, very, very much so, because the Anthropocene is out there, it's being used, and as a geologist I say that's great. Stratigraphy is finally popular. Wow, that's unheard of. So yes, I agree completely with John about that.